Before we begin, imagine an unmarked banker's box sitting on the bottom shelf of a county records room. No barcode, no case number on the spine. A strip of yellowing tape runs across the lid in block letters. Dandridge, Black Hollow. Do not circulate. Inside are photocopies that have bled to gray, field notes written in pencil, and photographs that never made it into any newspaper. The earliest document is a property map from 1932. The most recent page is dated half a century later, and the ink has run like it wanted to leave the paper. If you enjoy long-form investigations into forgotten places, consider subscribing. And if you've ever heard stories about families who live off the books, tell us in the comments. We read everything. On most road atlases, Black Hollow is a nameless fold in the Appalachian foothills, an unpaved spur shooting off a logging road, then vanishing into a tangle of switchbacks and hemlock. Locals use the name not so much for a town as for a pocket of land, a bowl of shadow where radio fizzles, mail doesn't go, and stories travel faster than trucks. The people most often tied to that pocket are the Dandridge family, a surname that surfaces in tax rolls, livestock disputes, and, once, in a state memo about non-compliant schooling. The first whispers look harmless. A 1934 sheriff log notes a trapper overdue by 3 days. His sled is found near a creek crossing with his gear bundled neatly under canvas. In 1938, a traveling tinsmith fails to arrive at the next town. His cart is recovered with the reins tied, the horse unhitched and grazing. Both entries close the same way: no further action. That phrase appears again and again, a rubber stamp that resolves nothing. What turns rumor into pattern are the margins, handwritten remarks that don't sound like stamps at all. One deputy, writing in 1941, adds, "Heard voices up ridge after dark," not a church hymn. A state forest warden in 1943 records smoke columns on the north slope, more than a cook fire, and, strangest of all, lying piles of ash arranged in rings. When asked to clarify, he underlines a single word: arranged. The Dandridges enter the paper trail in earnest with a one-page deed transfer from the early New Deal years, a cluster of parcels consolidated for agricultural use, subsistence. There's no neat family tree, only the repetition of a name across land that was cheap because it was difficult. In 1946, a county social worker attempts a welfare visit and is turned away at a fence by a woman who calls herself Mercy Dandridge. The note reads, "Advised of truancy. Told they educate at home. Children present but did not speak. One boy stared without blinking for extended time. No threat, but deeply uncomfortable scene." By the late 1940s, the language in official files grows careful. A spring flood in 1947 undermines a root cellar near Black Hollow Road, exposing what a deputy describes as long-term storage, hooks set high, shelves for preserving. Photographs attached to the report show jars clouded with age and a ledger of quantities written in a tight, old-fashioned hand. An addendum mentions animal bones found nearby with regular scoring. The document recommends no charges and closes with, "Storm damage. Secure and move on." It's as if the county wanted the water to carry away more than silt. The oral record says what the typed pages avoid. A retired mail carrier recalls leaving parcels at a drop post, never knocking, never crossing the fence line, and finding barter set out in return. Tallow, quilts, dried herbs. A school teacher remembers a girl who enrolled under one name and quietly left under another before winter set in. A logger swears his truck was paced for a quarter mile by 3 figures on the ridge who never seemed to hurry, yet never fell behind. They watched like you watch storms, he told a reporter decades later. Not afraid, just measuring. The first direct implication that something is wrong with the Dandridge land appears in a 1956 memorandum between a state investigator and the county solicitor. Most of the paragraph is blacked out, but the surviving sentence reads, "If we proceed with code enforcement, be prepared for a non-standard response. Recommendations include daylight visits and multiple units. A handwritten arrow in the margin points to a name, E. Dandridge, followed by the word patriarch, and a question mark, as if even the label wouldn't sit still." Neighbors describe the Dandridge homestead as a cluster of structures that seem to move with the seasons. A farmhouse that acquired new angles, a shed that changed ownership, smokehouses that came and went. None of it illegal, at least on paper. All of it hard to pin. More than once, a deputy's directions read like folklore. Second sycamore after the bend. Avoid the dogs. Don't look past the fence. And threaded through the retellings is a refrain that doesn't require gore to chill. They don't eat like we do. Sometimes it means strict gardens and preserved jars. Sometimes it means something else. But the speaker never defines it. If you look at the missing persons log with a ruler and a calm hand, the numbers aren't dramatic. One here, one there, an angler, a hitchhiker, a prospector. What throws the ruler off are the details that shouldn't match, but do. Camps left tidy, food undisturbed, vehicles with keys still in the ignition. In 2 cases, boot prints stop at the edge of a stream with no prints on the far bank. You can chalk that up to rain, to runoff, to animals. You can. The file never tells you not to. There is, however, a thin manila folder labeled simply Songs. It contains 3 transcriptions made by a state folklorist who visited the region in 1959. 2 are harmless ballads about hard winters and easier summers. The third, we're told, was recorded from a distance on a wire recorder positioned near Black Hollow Road. The lyrics are mostly vowels, more rhythm than melody, but the field note attached to the page lands like a stone. Pattern suggests call and response meant to carry across distance. Multiple voices, children included. By 1961, a park ranger named Alan Whitcomb, a name that will appear again, keeps a small notebook in his jacket for field checks. Most entries are routine: boundary fences, illegal traps, fire risk. One rainy afternoon, he writes only 4 lines. Old orchard beyond Second Ridge. Boards across an opening. Not a well. Smell of smoke that isn't fire. Heard singing where map shows no house. The next page is torn cleanly at the spiral. On the cardboard backing, pressed hard enough to indent, a final word remains: cellar. By the mid-1960s, the Dandridge name had become shorthand in county offices for "do not pursue." Reports stopped short, inquiries were redirected, and deputies quietly advised newcomers to keep to the main road. The box of documents shows a shift: fewer official memos, more scraps of paper. Notes torn from field books, unsigned letters, and inter-office messages without seals. One fragment, dated 1964, reads, "Inspection postponed. Recommendation: avoid further provocation. Unconfirmed reports of gatherings at night. Firelight visible from ridge. The handwriting is hasty, as if written under pressure." In the corner is a phrase underlined twice: "Not ordinary." Other records point to patterns no one wanted to acknowledge. Between 1966 and 1969, at least 5 disappearances occurred within a 10-mile radius of Black Hollow. A postal worker, a teenage hitchhiker, 2 hunters, and a woman driving home from a textile mill. None were linked officially, but their belongings, lunch pails, rifles, a handbag, were later recovered near the hollow, each set neatly aside as though arranged for discovery. In 1970, the county sheriff's department received a call from a logging crew. They claimed to hear voices in the tree line. Not shouts, not echoes, but chanting that rose and fell like a pattern. When deputies investigated, they reported finding a rough-hewn pit covered with planks. No arrests were made. The report ends abruptly with the words, "Area quarantined. Forestry matter." The deputy who wrote it resigned the same year, and then comes the testimony of Alan Whitcomb, the game warden whose notes had already brushed against the Dandridge farm. In a 1972 interview, preserved on tape but never transcribed in full, his voice is steady until the end. He explains he was conducting a routine patrol through the ridge trails when he saw movement below. According to him, children, perhaps half a dozen, darted between the trees in short, sudden bursts. They covered impossible distances in seconds, stopping all at once, as if obeying some unseen signal. They moved too fast for their size, Whitcomb says, like they'd been doing it their whole lives. And when I broke a branch underfoot, they froze, all of them, at the same time. Not scared, just waiting. The tape cuts off there. That same year, a memorandum circulated quietly through state offices. Most of it is blacked out, but one line remains legible. Potential threat to public safety. Recommend continued observation, but no direct engagement. Families appear self-contained. Possible contamination, cultural, biological, noted. In the margin, someone penciled a single question: cannibalism? The word was circled 3 times, then crossed out. By 1975, rumors of the Dandridge clan had spilled beyond county lines. Truckers passing through the Appalachians traded stories of the Hollow people. Pale figures glimpsed at the roadside, watching from behind tree lines. One state trooper describes stopping a woman walking barefoot on the shoulder. She gave her name as Dandridge, refused a ride, and vanished into the woods. His dash log ends with, "Could not pursue, road blocked." The documents trail into silence after that. Broken only by newspaper clippings, A missing hunter. A boy never found after fishing the creek. A family dog returning alone. All tied to the same patch of land, and all forgotten as quickly as they were noted. But then, in 1978, something happened that forced the Bureau itself to take notice. A pair of federal surveyors, sent to chart old mining claims, disappeared in Black Hollow. Their truck was found idling on the roadside, doors unlocked, maps spread on the seat. Weeks later, fragments of their equipment surfaced in a sheriff's evidence locker, tagged but never filed. Among them was a camera. The film had degraded, but one frame remained, a clearing ringed by trees, with figures faintly visible at the edge, too many to count. Their faces were blurred, but their posture unmistakable. Watching, waiting, and then nothing. The box is silent again for nearly a decade, but those who've studied it say that after 1978, the Dandridge File changed from a curiosity to something heavier, something the Bureau couldn't admit existed, but couldn't bring itself to destroy either. And so it was 1989, a year Sheriff Thomas Hale had marked in his mind long before the calendar turned. For months leading up to it, he had spent long nights in the county archives, combing through every fragment tied to Black Hollow and the Dandridge name. He read brittle reports stamped "no further action," listened to half-erased tapes, and traced maps where disappearances clustered like stains. The more he studied, the clearer one truth became. Something about that family and that place was wrong. But for Hale, the matter was not just professional. For a decade, he had carried the weight of a name scribbled in an old report. Matthew Hale, missing, presumed dead. Matthew had been his cousin, more like a brother, and his disappearance near Black Hollow was one of the reasons Thomas had pinned on a badge in the first place. He had chased petty thefts, land disputes, and barroom fights for years. But always in the back of his mind was the hollow. Locals whispered, outsiders avoided it, and officials wrote it off. But Hale wasn't just an official. He had blood in that soil, and someone he loved had vanished there. By the end of the decade, more disappearances had piled up, cases too familiar to ignore. A truck abandoned with its engine running, belongings laid out too neatly, tracks ending mid-stride. Hale told himself he was going to Black Hollow to ask questions. But beneath that resolve lay something deeper. He wanted to look Ezra Dandridge in the eye. The road into the hollow was tight and winding, branches scraping the cruiser like claws. The farther he drove, the heavier the air became, thick, metallic, tinged with a sweetness that clung to the back of his throat. The Dandridge homestead appeared in a clearing, an old farmhouse, its boards weathered and gray, a barn leaning to one side, smoke drifting from a smokehouse with a scent both sweet and unsettling. Ezra Dandridge was already waiting on the porch, tall, wiry, pale-haired. He stood with the quiet poise of someone who wasn't surprised, but prepared. Hale climbed out, boots sinking in the mud. His voice was steady, clipped with the authority of years of questioning. "Mr. Dandridge, I'm here about two hunters, Mark Simmons and Dale McCoy. They went missing on November 12th. 1987. Their truck was found abandoned on Ridge Road, rifles untouched. Did you see or hear anything unusual that night? Ezra tilted his head slightly. Hunters often come through. Some don't return. The mountains can be cruel. Hale pressed. And where were you that evening? Here? At the house? Did anyone in your family notice voices, lights, movement? Ezra's pale eyes flickered, though his voice remained calm. We were here, Sheriff, as we always are, and if voices carried through the woods, they were ours. We sing before supper. It is our custom, nothing more. Children began to emerge from the house, so many that Hale lost count. Some grown, some no older than 8 or 9, standing in the hallways and pressing their faces to the glass. The older ones sat rigid and silent, their eyes pale and unblinking. The younger ones lingered at the edges, watching. Ezra stepped forward. The porch creaked under his weight. Questions can wait until supper, he said evenly. Sit with us, eat, then we'll talk. Hale hesitated. It wasn't hospitality, it was strategy. And if he declined, the door to the Dandridge family might close forever. He gave a single nod. Inside, the house was bare, cold. Wooden walls, old photographs where every face seemed pale and flat-eyed. The air smelled of smoke and something unfamiliar. At the long table, Ruth Dandridge placed a steaming bowl before him. Her smile rehearsed, brittle. Ezra sat at the head, older children to his sides. The younger ones crowded the doorways, eyes glinting in the lamplight. Ezra extended his hands, and the family followed, forming a circle that enclosed Hale as well. The sound began low, a hum at first, then layered, building until the walls seemed to vibrate. No words, no melody, just a heavy, resonant chant that pressed against Hale's chest, rattling the silverware. It ended as abruptly as it began. Ezra lowered his hands. A blessing, he said softly. An old tradition. The stew was rich, the bread thick, the air thick with silence. Hale tasted the meat, tender, yet sharp, with a metallic tang he couldn't place. What kind of meat is this? He asked. Ezra's gaze was steady. Wild boar, prepared our way. You won't taste it anywhere else. They ate in silence, the older children watching Hale intently as though studying him. When the bowls were cleared, Hale leaned forward. One more thing, Mr. Dandridge, he said, his tone deliberate. You said your kin were here on November 12th. Every one of them? None away hunting? None tending stock elsewhere? Ezra's lips curved in something like a smile. All under this roof, Sheriff, every soul. You'll find no trail leading from here. And yet men vanished not 3 miles from this house. The smile faded. Ezra folded his hands on the table. The hollow takes who it takes. It has nothing to do with us. Hale waited, but Ezra said no more. Ruth's hand settled over her husband's, a signal that the conversation was over. When Hale finally stood, his questions remained unanswered. But something in the silence unnerved him more than lies could have. As he walked out into the night, he felt the weight of eyes on his back. Ezra's, Ruth's, and the older children's, all watching from the window. He drove off with a knot in his stomach. He hadn't left with evidence, but he had left with something else. The creeping certainty that he had been examined at that table, measured for a purpose he could not yet understand. Sleep didn't take Sheriff Thomas Hale that night. The house was quiet, but the song from the Dandridge table kept vibrating somewhere behind his ribs, more felt than heard, a pressure that wouldn't leave. He told himself it was just the strangeness of the meal, the way the older children watched him like a specimen, the metallic taste of meat that shouldn't have tasted like that. But when the clock struck 3 and he was still staring at the ceiling, he knew this wasn't going away on its own. By late morning, he was on the road again, only not to the farmhouse. He started at the edges, the places where talk traveled slowly but stuck. A weather-beaten trailer at the county line, a farmhouse with 3 broken windows and a porch held up by cinder blocks, a feed store where the bell over the door rang flatly and no one looked up. Most people gave him what he expected: shrugs, averted eyes, the old refrain about mountains and accidents. But one man, Cal Bennett, 60 if he was a day, with hands like split oak, leaned across his fence and spoke in a voice that didn't carry. "You're asking about the hollow," Cal said. "That family keeps to themselves. Best keep to yours." "I'm asking about songs," Hale replied. "Voices after sundown. Anyone ever tell you they heard something?" Cal's gaze shifted to the tree line. Wind moves strange there, but now and then, when I hear that hum, I bar my door and put out the lights. He swallowed. Folks that go looking on those nights don't always come back. In town, the paper trail bent into nothing. At the courthouse, the clerk produced land records for the Dandridge homestead that looked too neat. No liens, no disputes, no transfers in living memory. Birth certificates for some of the children were missing or filed years after the dates listed. Complaints about stolen livestock had been stamped received, and then, days later, closed, with no investigator's signature. When Hale asked to see the original logs, the clerk glanced at the wall clock and said, "System's down," though the printer hummed behind her. He drove the ridge roads until the sun slid toward the pines, mapping in his head the ways in and out of the hollow. On foot, he followed old deer runs that cut behind the Dandridge fields. He found places where brush had been cleared by hand, not animal, cut clean with a blade and left to look wild. He found saplings bent and tied at their tops, a backwoods way of marking direction. He found fresh impressions in the soft earth, a line of medium boots, evenly spaced, and beside them a smaller set, keeping pace stride for stride. At a distance, the house looked the same as before: gray boards, sagging roof, but the life inside had changed. There were more of the older children visible now, moving in pairs between the porch and the yard. Each task performed without speaking. The younger ones were shadows at the glass. The smokehouse breathed a thin ribbon of sweet-smelling smoke. Hale retreated into the trees as the light bled out of the day. He set himself low in the rhododendron, the leaves broad and dark enough to hide a man. He waited. It began as a tremor in the air, a low sound, familiar now, gathering under the dusk. Lamps flickered to life one by one. Ezra Dandridge stepped from the house, Ruth behind him, and the older children followed in 2 neat lines without a word exchanged. They carried baskets, burlap sacks, a dented lantern. No cross, no book, no preacher's stand, just that hum wrapping around them until it felt like the ground was humming back. They moved toward the barn. Hale steadied his breathing. Nothing about what he saw would prove a crime. Families eat, families pray, people sing before supper. He could feel the voice of his training in his head, listing the ways a case dies in the first mention of religion and tradition. But this wasn't a case in a binder. This was the ache where his cousin's name should have ended in a grave and didn't. He watched until the barn swallowed them and the doors drew shut with a hollow thud. The hum dulled, then deepened, as if the wood itself carried it. He stayed until the lamps inside winked out. The night grew colder. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a dog barked once and cut off. The moon slid between the clouds and showed him his hands, raw-knuckled, dirt in the lines. He told himself there was a right way to do this. Call for a warrant, convince a judge, draft an affidavit with nothing to stand on but song and smoke and missing paperwork. He imagined Colfax in the DA's office, reading it and handing it back unfiled. He checked his watch. A little past 2. By the time he eased from the rhododendron and crossed the field, the grass was slick with dew. He kept to the fence line where the ground held shadows. Up close, the barn rose like a swallowed shape, larger than it looked from the road. The padlock on the double doors was old brass, pitted with years of frost and thaw. The chain had been looped twice and tucked tight. Hale slid a thin tool from his pocket. Not standard issue, but cops collect habits along the way. He listened. Nothing but the slow rustle of the trees and his own breath. He worked the pick in under the shackle and felt for the sweet spot, the tiny shift that meant metal giving way to patience. It came in a small, satisfying click that sounded loud as a gunshot in the dark. He paused, counting backward, waiting for a light, a voice, a footstep. The night held. Hale drew the chain loose. An inch at a time, careful not to let it scrape the wood. He set the lock in his coat pocket, pressed his shoulder to the door, and eased it open just enough to slide through. Cold air spilled out, damp, metallic, faintly sweet. He slipped inside, and the dark closed around him like a held breath. The air inside the barn was heavy, almost syrupy, clinging to Hale's lungs with every shallow breath. His flashlight cut through the dark in narrow beams, catching dust that hung like ash. The floor was packed earth, uneven, pressed flat by years of footsteps. At first, it looked like nothing more than an old storehouse. Crates stacked against one wall, broken tools leaning in a corner, ropes coiled neatly as if waiting for work. But the deeper he stepped, the stranger the details became. Boots, a single pair, scuffed, caked with mud, the laces frayed down to threads. A belt buckle, dulled with age, initials carved faintly into the metal. A battered canteen with a dent punched into its side. Hale crouched. He knew those initials, at least one of them. They matched a report he had read weeks before. The name of a man who vanished in these hills 10 years earlier. He swept the light farther. More objects emerged, almost arranged. A woman's scarf draped over a beam, its color still faintly visible beneath the dust. A hunting knife stuck upright in a crack of wood, blade rusted brown. Fragments of clothing bundled in corners as if discarded in haste. It was not storage. It was a catalog. And then he saw the piles. Not large, but unmistakable. Bones, mixed with animal remains, stacked in crude heaps. Some worn smooth with age, others fresher, darker at the edges. Hale froze, bile rising in his throat. He had seen livestock picked clean by predators, but never like this. The cuts were too sharp, too deliberate. He gripped the flashlight tighter, knuckles white. His mind raced back to the dinner table. The strange metallic tang of the meat. The way Ezra's eyes had lingered on him as he chewed. He forced the thought away, but it clawed back in. The silence inside the barn was suffocating, too complete. Hale realized then what was wrong. The chanting he had heard earlier had stopped. He shifted his weight, and the floor groaned under his boot. The sound cracked through the barn like thunder. He froze, breath caught in his chest. From outside came the faint crunch of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, more than one pair. Lantern light leaked through the cracks in the wooden walls, thin beams slicing across his face. Voices followed, low and wordless, carrying that same rhythm he had heard at the table, only now stripped of melody. Just a hum, building, circling. Hale backed toward the far end of the barn, searching for another exit. His hand brushed against something hanging on the wall. He swung the light up, rows of hooks, and on them, more belongings, jackets, hats, keys, each one with a story of someone who never came back. The barn door rattled. The chain he had set aside clinked against the wall. A voice drifted in, calm and measured, unmistakable. Ezra Dandridge. "Sheriff," he called softly, almost kindly. "You shouldn't be here. This is not your place." Hale's pulse hammered in his ears. He backed farther into the dark, his hand instinctively reaching for his sidearm. The latch scraped. The door began to swing open. Lantern light swelled, shadows stretching long across the floor. And in that moment, Hale knew he hadn't stumbled on evidence. He had walked straight into the heart of it. Ezra Dandridge stood in the doorway, broad-shouldered despite his age, his face lined but steady. Behind him came the children. No, not just children. Young men and women, their pale hair catching the lantern glow, their eyes reflecting like glass. And further back, in the gaps of the light, smaller faces peered in, the younger ones, watching, silent. Ezra raised a hand, calm as if greeting an old friend. "Sheriff Hale," he said evenly, "we gave you supper. We gave you welcome. Why would you betray our trust?" Hale leveled his weapon, voice tight. "I've got evidence here, Ezra. Belongings of the missing. You're going to explain." Ezra's smile was thin, deliberate. Evidence? These are scraps, old things. You see what you want to see. But this is not your burden. A low murmur rose from the older sons and daughters. They did not shout, did not move wildly, but something in their presence pressed in, suffocating. Hale stepped back, his heel striking a crate. "Stay where you are," he barked. But his voice cracked. One of the young men moved. Just a step, but faster than Hale's eyes could follow. In that heartbeat, the distance between them shrank, and the boy's hand closed over the barrel of the revolver. His grip was iron, cold and unyielding. Hale pulled, twisted, nothing. The boy released it only when Ezra gave a slight nod, and the weapon clattered to the floor. Another figure stepped closer, a young woman this time, her eyes glinting. She tilted her head as though studying him, then pressed a single finger against his chest. The pressure alone shoved him back a full step. Too strong, far too strong. Hale's breath caught. He had come expecting lies, evasions, perhaps violence, but not this. Not the sense that he was prey in a cage of predators. Ezra's voice cut through the dark. "You shouldn't have come alone, Sheriff. Curiosity is a sickness, and you've been infected." The older children began to move now, circling slowly, their pale faces never breaking expression. The hum started again, low, resonant, vibrating through the walls. It wasn't words, it was ritual, the same sound Hale had heard at the dinner table. But now, raw, threatening, alive. Lanterns swung, shadows twisted. Hale's pulse hammered in his throat. He knew then he couldn't fight them. Not with a badge, not with a gun, not with anything he had. The only choice left was to run. Hale didn't wait for Ezra to speak again. He lunged sideways, snatched his revolver from the dirt, and shoved past the nearest figure. For a moment, he thought he'd broken free. But then the barn erupted. The older sons moved first, impossibly fast, their bodies blurring in the shifting lantern light. One seized Hale's arm, twisting with bone-snapping strength. Hale drove his elbow back, felt it connect, and the grip loosened just enough for him to tear free. He fired once, the report deafening in the closed space, but the bullet punched harmlessly into the rafters. The chanting surged, no longer low and steady, but sharp, urgent, pulsing through the wood. It wasn't meant for ceremony now. It was a signal. Hale bolted for the back wall, shouldering through the clutter of crates. He saw the outline of a narrow service door and threw himself at it. The wood splintered, burst outward, and he stumbled into the cold night air. But the Dandridge children were already pouring after him. Their silhouettes spilled from the barn like a flood, lantern light bouncing wildly in their hands. The hum of their chant followed, echoing off the hillsides, carrying farther than voices had any right to. Hale ran. His boots tore through mud, breath cutting like knives in his chest. Branches lashed his face as he plunged into the tree line. Behind him, they moved without stumbling, their pale forms slipping between the trees as though the forest itself bent to them. One of them lunged close, nearly at his side. Hale swung the revolver like a club, felt it crack against a skull, and the figure dropped. But another was already there, reaching, grasping with hands too strong for their size. He broke free again, sprinting downhill toward the sound of water, the river. If he could reach it, maybe he could lose them in the current. The chanting grew louder, rolling down the slope, layered with voices young and old. It didn't sound human anymore. It sounded like the hills themselves were alive, hunting him. He burst from the tree line, the river glinting black beneath the moonlight. For one impossible moment, he thought he had made it. Then a shape moved in the clearing ahead, Ezra himself, standing calmly with a lantern in his hand, its light painting his silver hair in fire. "You can't run from family, Sheriff," Ezra said softly. Hale staggered back, searching for another path, but the children were already spilling from the trees on both sides, encircling him in a tightening ring of pale faces and glimmering eyes. The chant reached a fever pitch, vibrating in his bones. He raised the revolver, empty now, the cylinder clicking on dry chambers. The sound was swallowed by their voices. The last thing he felt was the ground giving way beneath him as he stumbled backward into the rushing black of the river. The water swallowed his scream, and above him, lined along the ridge, the Dandridge family stood with lanterns raised high, their voices carrying into the night. When the current dragged him under, the chanting did not stop. It followed, echoing through the water, as though the river itself now belonged to them. Days later, when Sheriff Hale failed to return to his post, the county office launched a search. Deputies swept the logging roads, volunteers combed the ridges, and state police scoured the surrounding forests. All they found was Hale's patrol car, abandoned miles from Black Hollow, the keys still in the ignition. His revolver was missing, his radio dead. No body was ever recovered. The official report labeled it an accident. Perhaps he became lost in the woods, slipped from a trail, or fell victim to the hazards of the mountains. Wild animals, treacherous terrain, exhaustion. Any explanation was safer than the truth. But among the deputies, whispers spread. Some claimed to have heard voices during the search, a low humming carried on the wind, impossible to pin down. Others swore they saw lanterns moving deep between the trees, vanishing whenever approached. Hale's personal notes disappeared from the office. His case was quietly closed with the words, "Missing in the line of duty." His cousin's name, Matthew Hale, remained on the missing persons register alongside dozens of others. Officially, none of them were tied to Black Hollow. Officially, nothing ever would be. But the locals tell a different story. They say if you drive past the hollow on a still night, you might catch the sound of singing, an eerie chorus rising from the valley floor. Some speak of figures at the tree line, tall and pale, standing too still, too quiet. Keep your lights on them, and they vanish. Look away, and when you glance back, they seem closer. The Dandridge farm still stands, its boards weathered, its porches sagging, though no census lists the family. Outsiders who stray too near describe the same thing. Too many eyes watching from the windows. Children's faces pressed to the glass, silent and unblinking. And when the last tourist vanished in 2004, his car left idling at the roadside. State police marked it as environmental hazard, likely animal predation. But the locals knew better. Parents in nearby towns still warn their children, don't go near Black Hollow after dark. Don't follow the music if you hear it. And if you see lanterns moving in the trees, run, because the Dandridge family never left. They're still there, and they're still hungry.
If this story unsettled you, leave a like and let the shadows know. Subscribe for more tales you shouldn't hear after dark. And if you've seen something you can't explain, tell us in the comments. We're always listening.